Think of life as a video game you've been playing on default settings your entire life. You're struggling through levels while someone out there discovered the cheat codes decades ago. Carl Jung mapped out the source code of human psychology, and what he found changes everything. Today, I'm showing you how to hack the game of life using Jung's blueprint that most people will never discover. But here's the real question. What if the person you think you are isn't even you? What if you've been playing as a character someone else designed, living by rules you never agreed to, pursuing goals that were programmed into you before you could even think for yourself? Jung spent his entire career watching people wake up to this reality. And when they did, everything changed. Let me show you exactly how this works. Most people walk through life wearing a mask without even knowing it. Jung called this the persona. It's the social character you perform every single day. The professional you at work, the dutiful you with family, the agreeable you with friends. You've spent so much energy perfecting this mask that you've forgotten there's a face underneath it. Here's where it gets dangerous. When you identify completely with your persona, you create what Jung called the perfect person problem. You become so adapted to social expectations that you lose all connection to your authentic self. You know exactly what to say, how to act, what expressions to wear. But this perfection conceals a terrifying emptiness. Think about it. How often do you say what you actually think versus what people expect to hear? How many of your daily action reflect who you really are versus who you're supposed to be? The persona isn't inherently bad. We need it to function in society. The problem comes when the mask becomes the only identity you recognize. Here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. All those parts of yourself you rejected to maintain that perfect image, all those thoughts you suppressed, all those desires you denied, they didn't disappear. They accumulated in your unconscious like psychological pressure in a sealed container. Jung called this accumulated, rejected content your shadow. Your shadow contains everything you've been taught to deny about yourself, your capacity for cruelty, selfishness, manipulation, anger, and deception. Most people spend their entire lives running from their shadow, terrified of what they might find if they look directly at their darker aspects. But Jung discovered something revolutionary about the shadow. The shadow isn't evil. It's just unconscious, and anything that remains unconscious controls you from behind the scenes. This is where the most dangerous psychological mechanism Jung ever documented comes into play. Shadow projection. When you refuse to acknowledge your shadow, your unconscious mind projects those denied qualities onto other people. Suddenly everyone around you seems manipulative, selfish, or cruel. You can see these qualities clearly in others while remaining completely blind to them in yourself. The person you accused of being deceptive, they're mirroring your own denied capacity for deception. The friend you labeled as selfish, they're reflecting your own unacknowledged selfishness back at you. Jung wrote that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to understanding ourselves, but only if we have the courage to look inward rather than remaining focused outward. This is the first major hack in the game of life. Stop projecting your shadow onto others and start integrating it consciously. Shadow integration doesn't mean becoming cruel or selfish. It means acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe in others. You have the capacity for manipulation, violence, betrayal, and destruction. Admitting this doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person who can see clearly without judgment. When you integrate your shadow, something remarkable happens. You stop being disturbed by other people's behavior because you've acknowledged those same capacities within yourself. You stop projecting your denied traits onto innocent people. You stop unconsciously acting out the very behaviors you consciously condemn. But the persona and shadow are just the beginning. Jung discovered that beneath your personal psychology lies something far more powerful: archetypes. These are ancient patterns that structure human experience across all cultures and time periods. The hero, the sage, the caregiver, the warrior, the lover. Every human who ever lived has access to these same fundamental patterns. Here's where understanding archetypes becomes a genuine life hack. These patterns contain tremendous power and wisdom, but they also contain extreme dangers. When you identify your small personal ego with a vast archetypal pattern, Jung called this ego inflation. The person who identifies with the savior archetype believes they must rescue everyone. The person possessed by the warrior archetype sees enemies everywhere. Ego inflation creates what Jung called archetypal possession. Your individual personality disappears, replaced by something ancient and impersonal. You're no longer yourself. You're a channel for transpersonal energies beyond your capacity to integrate. The possessed person experiences extraordinary certainty and purpose, but they've lost contact with human limitations and complexity. The hack here is learning to work with archetypes without being consumed by them. You can channel the warrior's courage without becoming violently aggressive. You can access the sage's wisdom without developing spiritual superiority. You can embody the lover's passion without losing all boundaries. Jung called this conscious relationship with archetypal energies. At the center of all these patterns, Jung identified what he called the self, not your ego self, your small personal identity. The self with a capital S, the totality of your psyche, both conscious and unconscious, personal and archetypal. The self is the organizing principle of your entire psychological structure. Most people never encounter their self directly. They're too identified with their persona, too busy projecting their shadow, too possessed by archetypal patterns. But Jung discovered that the purpose of human psychological development is moving toward the self. He called this journey individuation. This is the ultimate game hack. Individuation is the process of becoming a psychologically complete individual, not perfect, not enlightened, not superior to others, just authentically and completely yourself. Here's how Jung mapped out the individuation journey, and this is where everything comes together. Phase 1 of individuation is recognition and differentiation. You must first recognize what belongs to you and what belongs to others. This sounds simple, but most people have no idea where they end and others begin. You've absorbed your parents' values, society's expectations, your culture's beliefs, and you think all of this is you. The first task is establishing boundaries between your authentic inner experience and unconsciously absorbed external content. Jung taught his patients to spend time in complete solitude daily, allowing absorbed material to settle so they could recognize their own authentic psychological voice. This is how you start distinguishing between what you actually believe and what you've been programmed to believe. Jung observed that many people have what he called superior perception. They see patterns others miss, sense hidden emotions, detect lies instantly, and feel unconscious tensions in every room. If this describes you, congratulations. You have an advanced feature most people never activate. But superior perception comes with a serious risk. People with heightened perception often become overwhelmed by unconscious contents from others. They absorb external psychological material until they can't distinguish their own feelings from what they're picking up from their environment. Jung called this participation mystique, a state where psychological boundaries dissolve completely. The recognition phase of individuation means learning that your superior perception isn't a malfunction. It's an advanced feature of consciousness development. You're not broken because you see everything others miss. You're psychologically ahead of your time. The question is whether you'll develop the skills necessary to integrate your perception consciously. Phase 2 of individuation is shadow integration. This is where you stop running from your darker aspects and start acknowledging them. Remember, people who see others' shadows clearly often do so because they haven't integrated their own. The more you deny your capacity for deception, selfishness, or cruelty, the more disturbed you'll be by seeing these qualities in others. Shadow integration means acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe around you. This doesn't make you bad, it makes you complete. When you integrate your shadow, you stop projecting it onto others. You stop unconsciously acting out the behaviors you consciously condemn. You stop being a psychological puppet controlled by denied aspects of yourself. Phase 3 is conscious participation. This is where you learn to use your gifts consciously while maintaining your identity. If you have superior perception, you learn to engage with others' psychological contents without being overwhelmed or losing yourself. If you've accessed archetypal energies, you learn to work with them without being possessed. Jung wrote that the individuated person can serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, helping to make the unconscious conscious in others without sacrificing their own psychological integrity. This requires developing what he called psychological containers, the ability to hold others' unconscious contents temporarily while maintaining awareness that they are not your own. The outcome of successful individuation is what Jung called the culture carrier or consciousness pioneer. You become someone who helps consciousness evolve not through preaching or teaching, but simply by embodying more conscious ways of being. Your presence alone becomes transformative because you're no longer unconsciously acting out denied patterns, but Jung documented serious pitfalls that derail individuation. The inflation trap is when you identify with your superior function rather than integrating it into a balanced personality. Highly perceptive individuals often fall into what Jung called the prophet complex, believing they must save everyone from unconsciousness. This leads to preaching judgment and eventual isolation. Another pitfall is withdrawal justification. Some people use their superior perception to justify complete withdrawal from society, convincing themselves that others are too unconscious to be worth engaging. Jung recognized this as spiritual superiority masquerading as wisdom. True individuation requires engagement with the unconscious world, not escape from it. The most dangerous pitfall is what Jung called the helper's high. Some highly perceptive individuals become addicted to being needed, defining themselves entirely through their ability to see and help others while losing contact with their own inner development. When perception becomes identity, the person disappears behind the function. Jung studied historical figures to understand the difference between successful integration and psychological breakdown. He observed nature's ability to see through social, religious, and philosophical facades with devastating clarity, but noted that nature never learned to integrate these insights constructively. Instead of using his perception in the service of healing, he wielded it as a weapon against society. Nature's isolation and eventual breakdown represented what happens when superior perception remains unintegrated. The individual becomes consumed by what they see rather than transformed by it. In contrast, Jung extensively studied Meister Eckhart, the medieval mystic, who possessed what Jung called mystical intuition, the ability to perceive spiritual and psychological realities others couldn't access. Unlike nature, Eckhart channeled his insights into compassionate service. He transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them. He saw clearly but spoke in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance. Jung noted that Eckhart's success came from conscious humility, recognizing that superior perception is a gift to be shared wisely, not a weapon to be wielded. Most significantly, Jung documented his own struggle with overwhelming perception during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious from 1913 to 1919. His superior perception of unconscious contents, both his own and others, nearly destroyed him until he learned to integrate these experiences consciously. Jung's breakthrough came when he realized his overwhelming perceptions weren't pathological, but evolutionary. They represented consciousness attempting to evolve beyond current collective limitations. This realization transformed his approach to patients with similar gifts. He understood they weren't suffering from mental illness. They were experiencing consciousness expansion without proper integration skills. This brings us to the ultimate life hack Jung discovered. Unintegrated perception or unintegrated shadow will destroy you through isolation or psychological annihilation. But when consciously integrated, these same elements transform you into exactly what humanity needs. The hack isn't about changing the game's rules. It's about changing yourself to master the game. Think about Eckhart versus nature. Both had extraordinary perception. One used it destructively and collapsed. The other used it constructively and became a wisdom teacher for centuries. The difference wasn't in their perceptive abilities, it was in how consciously they integrated what they saw. The final state Jung called love with boundaries and conscious humility. You can care deeply about others while protecting yourself. Absolutely, you can see everything without becoming cynical. You can love profoundly without losing yourself. This is the win condition in the game of life. Here's what Jung wanted you to understand. You're not too much. You're not broken because you see what others don't see. You're not crazy because you feel what others can't feel. You're ahead of your time, and the world desperately needs people who can perceive what collective consciousness isn't ready to acknowledge. But perception without integration destroys. Gifts without wisdom become curses. Superior function without balance becomes isolation. The ultimate danger isn't in seeing everything, it's in failing to use what you see wisely. This is why Jung spent his life mapping the individuation process. The game of life has hidden mechanics that most people never discover. Your persona is just a character skin, not your true identity. Your shadow contains denied power, not actual evil. Archetypes offer access to transpersonal wisdom if you don't become possessed by them. And the self represents your ultimate potential for psychological wholeness. Individuation is the cheat code Jung left us. Recognition and differentiation teach you what's actually yours versus what you've absorbed. Shadow integration stops you from unconsciously sabotaging yourself. Conscious participation lets you use your gifts consciously and never stop moving toward wholeness, and that's how you win the game. Jung discovered not by being perfect, but by being completely, authentically, consciously yourself. Now you have the blueprint. The only question is whether you'll use it. If you found this valuable, share your biggest takeaway in the comments below. Let me know which part of Jung's system resonates most with you. And if you're ready to explore more ways to hack reality using psychology, philosophy, and ancient wisdom, subscribe for weekly content that challenges everything you think you know. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.